Hello everybody, I am Boofire191. Goblin Slayer. Why does his eye glow? Really silly question to be sure, but it's one that enough people have asked for it to appear in YouTube's search bar. The most basic answer to this is because it looks cool and symbolizes Goblin Slayer's rage. By the time this video was published, the glowing eye is nothing more than that. It isn't magic or a power, it merely is what it is, a cool looking eye. So if you wanted the plain Jane answer, then there you go. If you want to click off, then feel free. However, the more in-depth answer sheds light on what most likely influenced this visual in the first place. Goblin Slayer's glowing red eye tends to change position. However, the left eye is the one that predominantly gets this treatment. Now, why is that important? Well, if you've seen the thumbnail, assuming of course I didn't change it, then you have your answer. Despite the issues I had with the show, there is something it does really well. Goblin Slayer and his rehumanization. Due to the suffering Goblin Slayer and those he cared about went through, our protagonist became a shell of a man. In the wake of his disastrous childhood, he became nothing more than a skilled killer. Any semblance of a normal life was taken away from him. For all intents and purposes, he was a machine who only had one purpose. A purpose which he took as his own name. Over time, this would change as he opened himself up to his party, and most importantly, to Priestess. Once again, why is this important? Well, to put it simply, Goblin Slayer's tale of rehumanization is one we've seen before. It's a tale we've seen in Berserk, with Golden Age guts specifically. Want to state that this similarity doesn't take away from Goblin Slayer or lessens its quality. However, it is a similarity nonetheless. To contradict what I just said, Goblin Slayer is not Berserk. Goblin Slayer's anime adaptation is not the best Berserk anime adaptation. Not throwing or even trying to throw any shade, it's just a sentiment I've seen floating around. Goblin Slayer and Berserk are not in the same league as one another, nor are they trying to be. This is fine. They both may share a more dark fantasy setting and have, let's just say, offbeat moments, but they are unto themselves their own thing. Due to the country of origin and similar genres, it is a very safe assumption that the creator of Goblin Slayer read Berserk. If he did, it shows, and if he didn't, then at the very least, the impact of the work had a less direct influence upon Goblin Slayer. After all, Berserk has had a profound impact upon manga and media as a whole. Going back to something I said earlier, that being Goblin Slayer's tale of rehumanization, drawing parallels to Golden Age Guts. To say Guts had a rough childhood would be one hell of an understatement. He was born out of a dead woman who had been hung, was raised by a mercenary company, and a man who wasn't the most swell of guys. He fought on the front lines of countless battles and was betrayed by someone he'd come to view as a father. Basically, Guts lost his childhood and became a shell of a man. He was nothing more than a skilled killer who had any semblance of a normal life taken away. This would change, however, after Guts joined the Band of the Hawk, and grew close to those he would eventually call friends, with Casca being the chief standout. Now, I have to ask you a question, dear viewer. What would happen to Goblin Slayer if Priestess died? What would happen if she was raped by someone he had come to call a friend after everyone he had come to care for had been butchered? What would happen if he finally saw the light, only for it to be snatched from him? I suspect he'd become a lot like Guts and let the darkness consume him. During an event known as the Eclipse, Guts loses his right eye as well as his left arm. He also loses the humanity he regained while fighting beside the Band of the Hawk. Through circumstance I'm not going into here, Guts is able to escape basically hell, then, not long after physically recovering from his ordeal, he dons his black armor, picks up the slab of iron called the Dragon Slayer, and sets out upon a quest of vengeance against the demons who took away everything he had. During his quest for vengeance, Guts often gives in to his rage and does things not really becoming of a hero. His visage turns dark. He's obscured completely in shadow with the exception of his left eye. Looks familiar, doesn't it? A prime example of this, as well as explanation, is in the Lost Children arc where he is fighting an elf-like apostle. That's what the very powerful demons are called in Berserk for those who are confused. Guts learns that his foe was a young girl who ran away from home in order to escape her abusive parents. One thing led to another, and she underwent the process of becoming an apostle, a process which requires the sacrifice of something or someone close to you. Needless to say, her parents suddenly disappeared. During the fight, Guts had a few chances to kill the girl, but failed to do so. He contemplates whether or not it's due to her story, or if it's because she still looks like a child in her demonic form. With death closing in, Guts is forced to black out his emotions. He's forced to black out his humanity, and fixate on one thing, his urge to kill. When Guts' face is drawn in all black except for his single eye, it represents the headspace he's in. When he gets like that, Guts is no longer Guts. He's a man who is driven by one single thing, a desire to kill. When he gets like this, Guts either does something incredibly badass or something bordering or outright being evil. What I'm trying to illustrate here is this. Goblin Slayer and Guts have very similar pasts and tales that share a dark, or for Goblin Slayer, darker than a normal, fantasy setting. They also follow similar paths when it comes to their rehumanization. However, Goblin Slayer hasn't had an event like the Eclipse to completely mess him up. Those facts are important for explaining why Goblin Slayer's eye glows, especially when you factor in the influence Berserk has had upon media. I am not saying Goblin Slayer ripped off Berserk, nor am I saying it is merely a reference. What I am saying, however, is if we examine one, we can find the reasoning for another, since it appears there was at least some influence from Berserk due to the similarities I already explained. Guts' face becomes black due to him shutting out everything and focusing only upon his urge to kill. His left eye alone remains white because he lost his right one during the eclipse. Guts has this powerful urge to kill due to his hatred of the forces of, let's just call it hell, due to the events of the eclipse, an event where his journey of rehumanization came crashing down. Goblin Slayer, on the other hand, used to be robotic. He dedicated his life to doing only one thing, killing goblins. He had no purpose in life until he met Priestess and the rest of the party who began his rehumanization. So, why does his eye glow, I can hear you ask? Simple. His eye glows to represent the rage he's feeling in that given moment, especially when he is facing his hated enemy, the goblins. However, there's more to it than that. His eye glows, specifically the left one, which predominantly does this, due to the influence of Berserk. It's a great visual trick which clues the audience into the character's headspace, a trick which has worked for both pieces. Like I said at the start of the video, it glows because it looks cool and symbolizes Goblin Slayer's rage. However, its origin was most likely influenced by a legendary contemporary which exists within the same genre. So, here's a question for you, dear viewer. Why does Goblin Slayer's eye glow red? Why is Guts' face shadowed in black? The answer to those questions is the reason why I say Goblin Slayer was influenced by Berserk as opposed to ripping it off. Red is often associated with passion, with rage. This is important when you take into account Goblin Slayer's robotic personality. In those brief moments where he kills goblins, he feels something. He feels rage, but he also feels pleasure as he kills those he desired to kill. Black, on the other hand, is nothing. It is devoid of color, of emotion. When Guts kills apostles in his blackened out state, he feels nothing except his urge to kill. There are many emotions which lead up to this state, such as fear, anger, hatred, and even ecstasy, as Puck points out. However, the state itself is one of no emotion. In that state, one could argue that Guts is no longer human. I made a point of comparing Golden Age Guts to Goblin Slayer due to the difference in meaning between their glowing eyes. Goblin Slayer and Guts walked very similar paths as they bonded with those close to them. They learned what it meant to be human and learned how to feel emotions. Where their paths diverged, however, is at the Eclipse, where their respective quests to become human reached very different conclusions. Goblin Slayer opening himself up led to victory and happiness. Guts opening himself up, on the other hand, led to suffering, the likes of which few could comprehend. The question was a silly one, as I stated at the beginning. However, it is one that sheds a bit more light upon Goblin Slayer. The reason his eye glows red is to illustrate to the audience the fact that he is enraged, a fact which is important because it contrasts his overall more robotic nature. It's a simple little cue, sure, however it's a cue that gets across important information which has been prevalent in many stories, some of which that are considered to be masterpieces. Despite this video being an excuse to compare Goblin Slayer and Berserk, as well as just talk about something I'm currently loving, I hope you all enjoyed yourselves. There's a reason why I'm upfront with videos like this at the start. The answer was a simple one, which most knew. However, getting to that answer is a different story. With all of that said, I've been Boofire191. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Tell me what you thought down below. I'll see all of you guys next time. Goodbye.